Prince Alexander stood at the tall windows of his London apartment, watching the rain streak down the glass like tears. The phone call he had just finished would change everything. Stream Now, the world's biggest streaming platform, had given him the green light for the most controversial project of his life. The documentary would tell the real story of his mother, Princess Isabella, who died in a tragic car accident 15 years ago when Alexander was just 12 years old. For years, the royal family of Valdoria had controlled the narrative about her death, painting her as a troubled woman who couldn't handle royal life. But Alexander knew the truth was much darker. His wife, Catherine, entered the room carrying 2 cups of tea. She had been born a commoner, a successful journalist before their marriage, and the royal establishment had never fully accepted her. "The kids are finally asleep," she said, setting down the cups. "So what did Stream Now say?" Alexander turned from the window, his blue eyes intense with determination. "They said yes. Full creative control, unlimited budget, and they want it released next year on the anniversary of her death." Catherine's face showed both excitement and worry. "Alex, you know what this means. Your father will be furious. The Queen will probably strip you of your titles. The palace will declare war on us. Let them," Alexander replied, his voice steady. "I'm tired of protecting people who destroyed my mother's reputation to save their own. The world deserves to know who she really was." Princess Isabella had been beloved by the people but hated by the royal establishment. She had spoken out about poverty, mental health, and social justice at a time when royals were expected to stay silent on controversial topics. She had also discovered something about the royal finances that certain people wanted kept secret. Alexander walked to his desk and pulled out a locked box. Inside were letters, photographs, and documents his mother had hidden before her death. His private investigator had spent 5 years tracking them down, following clues Isabella had left behind like breadcrumbs for her son to find when he was old enough. "Look at this," he said, showing Catherine a letter written in his mother's handwriting. She knew they were planning to discredit her. She wrote this 3 days before she died, saying she feared for her safety. Catherine read the letter, her hands trembling slightly. "Alex, this is explosive. If this is real, it suggests my mother was murdered," Alexander finished. "Not by a drunk driver in a tunnel, but by people who wanted her silenced forever." The evidence was circumstantial but compelling. The driver of the other car had disappeared immediately after the accident and was never found. The investigation had been rushed and closed within weeks. Key witnesses had changed their stories or refused to talk. And most importantly, Isabella's personal security team had been mysteriously reassigned just hours before her death. Alexander's phone buzzed with a text message from his private secretary. "Urgent meeting request from His Majesty. Palace wants to see you tomorrow morning." "They already know," Catherine said, reading over his shoulder. "Of course they know. The palace has spies everywhere. But it doesn't matter now. I've already signed the contract with Stream Now. The filming starts next month." Alexander had been planning this documentary for 3 years, ever since he and Catherine had stepped back from their senior royal duties. The decision to leave had been painful but necessary. The royal establishment had made their lives miserable, criticizing everything they did, controlling their charitable work, and worst of all, refusing to protect Catherine and their children from vicious media attacks. The breaking point had come when tabloid newspapers published private family photos taken with telephoto lenses inside their private residence. When Alexander complained to his father, King William, he had been told that media attention was part of the job, and he should stop being so sensitive. That night, Alexander had made his decision. If the royal family wouldn't protect his wife and children, he would take them somewhere they could live safely and freely. But he hadn't forgotten about his mother, and he hadn't forgiven those responsible for destroying her. The documentary would feature interviews with people who had been silenced for years. Isabella's former bodyguard, who had been dismissed weeks before her death, had agreed to speak on camera for the first time. Her personal assistant, who had witnessed heated arguments between Isabella and senior royals, would reveal what she had seen. Most importantly, a former palace insider would expose the secret financial dealings that Isabella had discovered. Alexander looked at a photograph of his mother holding him as a baby. In the picture, she was smiling, but he could see the sadness in her eyes even then. She had been trapped in a system that demanded perfection while giving nothing in return. "The palace will try to stop us," Catherine warned. They have lawyers, influence, connections everywhere. Then we'll have to be smarter than them, Alexander replied. Stream now has the best legal team in the world. They've dealt with powerful people trying to suppress stories before, and we have something they don't have. What's that? The truth. And 15 years of public sympathy for my mother. People remember how she was treated. They'll want to hear her real story. As if on cue, Alexander's phone rang. The caller ID showed his brother's name, Prince Edward, the heir to the throne and the palace's most loyal defender. Alexander let it ring. He wasn't ready for that conversation yet. First, he needed to prepare for tomorrow's meeting with his father. It would be the most important conversation of his life, and possibly the last time he would speak to the king as his son. The throne room at Valdoria Palace had never felt more intimidating to Prince Alexander as he walked across the polished marble floor toward his father. King William sat rigidly on the ancient golden throne, his face a mask of controlled fury. Beside him stood the Queen Mother, Alexander's grandmother, whose disapproving stare could freeze water. Sit, the king commanded, gesturing to a simple wooden chair placed deliberately far from the throne. It was a power move Alexander recognized from his childhood. Make the person feel small and isolated. Alexander remained standing. I prefer to stand, Your Majesty, the formal address stung. For 37 years, Alexander had called this man father or papa. But today felt different. Today the king was his adversary. We know about your little project with Stream now. The Queen Mother spoke first, her voice dripping with disdain. And we know you've been collecting materials about your mother's death. This foolishness ends today. It's not foolishness, grandmother. It's justice. King William leaned forward, his knuckles white as he gripped the throne's armrests. Justice? You want to destroy this family, this monarchy, for what? Some fantasy that your mother was a victim instead of a troubled woman who couldn't handle her responsibilities? The words hit Alexander like physical blows, but he had expected them. The royal family had been rewriting Isabella's story for 15 years, turning her from a beloved princess into a cautionary tale about the dangers of marrying into royalty. She wasn't troubled, Alexander said firmly. She was murdered because she discovered your illegal financial dealings with the Meridian Corporation. The silence that followed was deafening. The Queen Mother's face went pale, while the king's jaw tightened dangerously. You have no proof of such ridiculous allegations, the king finally said, but his voice lacked conviction. Alexander pulled out a manila folder from his jacket. Actually, I do. Bank records, email communications, recorded phone calls. Mother was thorough in her investigation before she died. The Meridian Corporation was a defense contractor that had received billions in government contracts through questionable bidding processes. Isabella had discovered that several members of the royal family had secret investments in the company, making them wealthy while the nation struggled with austerity measures. Those documents are stolen property, the Queen Mother snapped. You cannot use them. Actually, I can. Mother left them to me legally through her personal lawyer, who kept them in trust until I turned 35. Everything is completely legitimate. The king stood abruptly, his face flushed with anger. Alexander, I am ordering you as your king and your father to abandon this project immediately. The damage to the monarchy could be irreparable. The monarchy damaged itself when it decided money was more important than my mother's life. For a moment, Alexander thought his father might strike him. Instead, the king walked to the window, staring out at the palace gardens where Isabella had once played with her sons. Your mother was sick, Alexander. Mentally ill. The pressures of royal life, the constant scrutiny, the isolation, it broke her mind. She was seeing conspiracies everywhere, accusing innocent people of terrible things. She was not mentally ill, Alexander said quietly. That's what you told the doctors to write in their reports after you bribed them. I have those records too, the Queen Mother gasped audibly. You're talking about treason, boy. These accusations against your own family are based on facts, not loyalty or tradition. The throne room doors opened, and Prince Edward entered, flanked by 2 palace lawyers. Alexander's older brother looked haggard, as if he hadn't slept in days. Alex, please, Edward said, his voice strained. Think about what you're doing. Think about your children. Do you want them to grow up knowing their father destroyed their heritage? I want them to grow up knowing their grandmother was a hero who died trying to expose corruption, not a villain who died because she was weak. One of the lawyers stepped forward. Your Royal Highness, We need to inform you that proceeding with this documentary could result in charges of sedition, defamation, and breach of the Official Secrets Act. Alexander laughed bitterly. There it is. When reason fails, threaten legal action. Mother warned me you would do this. He pulled out his phone and played an audio recording. Isabella's voice filled the throne room, clear and determined. If something happens to me, if they claim I was unstable or suicidal, don't believe them. I am of sound mind, and I fear for my safety because of what I've discovered. Alexander, my darling boy, when you're old enough and strong enough, please tell the world who I really was. The recording ended in silence. The Queen Mother was crying softly, perhaps remembering the daughter-in-law she had once loved before the money and power corrupted everything. She made dozens of these recordings, Alexander said, all dated, all witnessed by her lawyer. StreamNow's legal team has reviewed everything. We're not breaking any laws. King William turned back to face his son. What do you want from us, Alexander? What will it take to stop this madness? I want you to tell the truth about Mother's death. I want you to admit that she was murdered because she threatened to expose your financial crimes. And I want you to apologize to her memory and to the people of Valdoria for lying to them for 15 years. That's impossible, Edward said immediately. The scandal would bring down the government, destabilize the economy, destroy our relationships with allied nations. Then you should have thought about that before you decided to kill my mother. The accusation hung in the air like poison gas. For the first time in his life, Alexander had directly accused his family of murder. Get out, the king whispered. Get out of this palace and never return. You are no longer welcome in this family. I stopped being part of this family the day you murdered my mother, Alexander replied. But now the whole world will know what kind of people you really are. As Alexander walked toward the doors, his grandmother called out weakly, Alexander, please. Your mother wouldn't have wanted this. She loved this family despite everything. He paused without turning around. She loved the family she thought existed. But that family died with her 15 years ago. Outside the palace, Alexander's security team was waiting. As they drove through the gates, he called Catherine. How did it go? She asked. Exactly as we expected. They tried threats, guilt, and legal intimidation. When that failed, they disowned me. Are you okay? Alexander looked back at the palace through the rear window. I will be. Once the world knows the truth about Mother, I will be. The war between Prince Alexander and the royal family of Valdoria had officially begun. 3 weeks after his explosive confrontation with the king, Prince Alexander sat in a secret location, a private estate in the countryside owned by one of StreamNow's executives. The documentary production team had transformed the historic manor into a high-security filming facility, complete with encrypted communication systems and round-the-clock protection. Margaret Foster, the award-winning director chosen for the project, spread photographs across the mahogany table. We have 12 confirmed interviews scheduled, she said, her voice professional but excited. Each one more explosive than the last. Alexander studied the faces in the photographs. People who had remained silent for 15 years, terrified of royal retribution. Now finally they were ready to speak. Tell me about Sarah Chen, Alexander said, pointing to a photo of an elegant Asian woman in her 50s. Princess Isabella's former personal assistant, Margaret replied. She was with your mother every day for 3 years before the death. She witnessed the threatening phone calls, the mysterious meetings with palace officials, and most importantly, she helped your mother hide the evidence. Sarah Chen had fled to Hong Kong immediately after Isabella's death, claiming she needed to care for her sick mother. In reality, she had been terrified that she would be the next target. She had spent 15 years looking over her shoulder, never speaking about what she had seen. What convinced her to finally talk? Alexander asked. Your children, Margaret said simply. When she saw photos of them being harassed by photographers last year, she said she couldn't stay silent anymore. She doesn't want another generation to suffer for royal secrets. The second key witness was even more important. Commander James Richardson, Isabella's former head of security. He had been mysteriously reassigned to a remote diplomatic post just 2 days before her death, replaced by inexperienced guards who failed to protect her. Richardson was devastated by your mother's death, Margaret explained. He blamed himself for not being there. When he requested a transfer back to royal protection duties, he was denied and eventually forced into early retirement. What does he know about the night she died? Everything. He received a call at 3 a.m. informing him that your mother's plans had changed, and she no longer needed security for her evening appointment. But your mother never made that call. Someone else did, using her private line. Alexander felt a chill run down his spine. The evidence was falling into place like pieces of a deadly puzzle. The third witness would be the most controversial, Lord Sebastian Hartwell, a former palace insider who had served as the king's private secretary during the crucial period. Hartwell had fallen out of favor with the royal family 5 years ago when he questioned their increasingly secretive financial dealings. Hartwell has documents, Margaret said quietly. Correspondence between your father and Meridian Corporation executives. Plans to discredit your mother if she went public with her discoveries. And most damning of all, a contingency plan called Operation Nightfall. What was Operation Nightfall? A detailed strategy for handling the Isabella problem, if she couldn't be controlled through normal means. The documents include psychological profiles designed to make her appear unstable, media talking points to discredit her claims, and... Margaret paused, clearly uncomfortable. And what? Instructions for staging an accident that would look like the result of reckless driving. Alexander's hands clenched into fists. Seeing his mother's murder reduced to a bureaucratic operation plan filled him with rage beyond anything he had ever felt. Meanwhile, across London, the palace was conducting its own war preparations. In a secure conference room, King William met with his most trusted advisors, lawyers, intelligence officials, and media experts. We need to destroy his credibility before the documentary airs, declared Sir Marcus Blackwood, the king's chief counsel. Make him appear unstable, opportunistic, driven by greed rather than justice. The public still sympathizes with him, warned Rebecca Sterling, the palace's media strategist. They remember how he was treated as a child after his mother died. Any direct attacks will backfire. Then we attack indirectly, suggested General Thompson, the head of royal security. Focus on his wife. She's already unpopular with traditionalists. Paint her as the manipulative outsider who's turned him against his family. King William listened to these suggestions with growing unease. Each proposal sounded like something from the original plan against Isabella. Were they really prepared to destroy another family member to protect their secrets? There's another option, said a new voice from the corner of the room. Dr. Victoria Marsh, the palace's psychological consultant, had been quietly taking notes. We could claim that Alexander is suffering from delayed trauma related to his mother's death. Frame the documentary as the delusions of a grieving son who never properly processed his loss. The room fell silent as everyone considered this approach. It was exactly what they had done to Isabella. Question her mental state to discredit her accusations. The irony is perfect, Sir Marcus said slowly. Son follows mother into madness. The public will eat it up. Back at the secret filming location, Alexander was reviewing security footage from the night of his mother's death. Stream now had hired digital forensics experts to analyze every available recording from that evening. Look at this, said Dr. Emma Walsh, the lead forensic analyst. She pointed to a timestamp on the screen. Your mother's car was photographed by 3 different traffic cameras. In each image, there's a second vehicle following her, a black sedan with tinted windows. Did you identify the car? We tried, but the license plates were either obscured or fake. However, we did find something interesting. She switched to another screen showing enhanced images. The same car appears in surveillance footage outside your mother's hotel 2 hours earlier, and again near the tunnel where the accident occurred. So she was being followed. Stalked would be a more accurate term. This wasn't random surveillance, it was a coordinated operation. Alexander stared at the images, feeling overwhelmed by the evidence mounting against his own family. Each new revelation made their guilt more obvious and their attempts to cover it up more desperate. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Stop the documentary or your children will suffer the same fate as your mother. Alexander showed the message to his security chief, Colonel Peters, a former Special Forces officer who had left royal service to work for him privately. We need to move your family to a more secure location immediately, Peters said grimly, and we need to inform Stream now that the palace is escalating from legal threats to physical intimidation. No, Alexander said firmly. We don't run and we don't hide. But we do accelerate our timeline. How quickly can we complete filming? Margaret Foster overheard the conversation. With round-the-clock shooting, we could finish all interviews within 10 days. But rushing the production increases the risk of mistakes. The only mistake would be giving them time to stop us. Alexander replied. My mother waited too long to tell her story. I won't make the same error. As news of the threat spread through the production team, Alexander noticed something remarkable happening. Instead of being intimidated, the crew became more determined. The cameramen worked longer hours. The researchers dug deeper into evidence, and the witnesses seemed more resolved to tell their stories. That evening, as Alexander video called his children at their secure location, his 5-year-old daughter asked him a question that broke his heart. Daddy, why don't Grandpa and Uncle Edward want to see us anymore? Because sometimes grown-ups disagree about important things, he answered carefully. Is it because of Grandmama Isabella? The one who's in heaven? Alexander looked at his daughter's innocent face and made a silent promise to his mother's memory. No matter what threats came, no matter what price he had to pay, the truth would be told. His children would grow up knowing their grandmother was a hero, not the villain the palace had painted her to be. The battle for Princess Isabella's legacy was about to reach its most dangerous phase. The interview room was stark white, with only 2 chairs facing each other under professional lighting. Sarah Chen sat nervously adjusting her sleeve, 15 years of silence about to end. Across from her, Prince Alexander waited patiently as the cameras rolled. Tell me about the last conversation you had with my mother, he said gently. Sarah's hands trembled as she began to speak. It was the morning of her death. Princess Isabella called me into her private study. She was packing documents into a briefcase. Bank statements, photographs, recorded conversations. She said if anything happened to her, I should make sure you received everything when you were old enough. What kind of photographs? Pictures of your father and Prince Edward meeting with Meridian Corporation executives at secret locations. Your mother had hired a private investigator to follow them. She discovered they weren't just investors. They were using their royal influence to guarantee government contracts worth billions. Alexander leaned forward. Did she confront them about this? Yes, 2 weeks before she died. She presented the evidence to your father in his private office. I was waiting outside, but I could hear shouting. When she came out, she was crying. She told me they had threatened to take you and Prince Edward away from her if she ever spoke publicly about what she'd discovered. The revelation hit Alexander like a physical blow. His mother had been silenced not just with threats against her own life, but threats against her children. There's something else, Sarah continued, her voice barely a whisper. The night before she died, a man came to see her. Someone from the palace. I didn't recognize him. They talked for an hour in her study. After he left, your mother was terrified. She kept saying, they're going to kill me, Sarah. They're really going to kill me. The interview lasted 3 hours. By the end, Sarah had revealed a conspiracy that went far deeper than anyone had imagined. The royal family hadn't just been corrupt. They had been systematically eliminating anyone who threatened their financial empire. The next day brought Commander James Richardson, Isabella's former security chief. Unlike Sarah's nervous energy, Richardson radiated controlled anger, a professional soldier betrayed by the people he had sworn to protect. I received the call at 3:17 a.m., he said, staring directly into the camera. A voice claiming to be Princess Isabella, saying her plans had changed and she no longer needed security for the evening. But I had known your mother for 5 years. That wasn't her voice. How can you be certain? Princess Isabella had a slight speech impediment. She pronounced certain words differently because of a childhood injury. The woman on the phone didn't have that pattern. Plus, your mother never would have dismissed security without discussing it with me personally first. Richardson revealed that he had tried to call Isabella back to confirm the order, but her phone went straight to voicemail. When he attempted to send backup security anyway, he was told by palace officials that any unauthorized protection would be considered insubordination. I should have ignored the order, Richardson said, his voice breaking slightly. I should have protected her anyway. But I was a soldier, I followed commands. And that command got your mother killed. But Richardson's most shocking revelation came when Alexander asked about the accident scene itself. I arrived at the tunnel 20 minutes after the crash. Your mother was still alive when the first responders got there, but she died before reaching the hospital. The official report said she died on impact, but that's not true. She lived long enough to say something to the paramedic. What did she say? Tell my son it wasn't an accident. The paramedic told me this directly, but when I tried to include it in my report, I was ordered to remove it. The paramedic died in a separate car accident 3 months later. The camera captured Alexander's face as this information sank in. His mother had survived the initial crash. She had been conscious enough to leave a final message, and that message had been suppressed for 15 years. Meanwhile, at Valdoria Palace, an emergency meeting was taking place. King William sat at the head of a mahogany table, surrounded by his most trusted advisors. The mood was desperate. "The interviews are airing in 2 weeks," Sir Marcus Blackwood reported grimly. "Our legal challenges have all failed. Stream now has bulletproof contracts and ironclad evidence. What about the psychological angle?" the king asked. "Can we still claim Alexander is having a breakdown?" Dr. Victoria Marsh shook her head. "Too late. The interviews show him completely rational and well-informed. Any claims of mental instability would be obviously false." General Thompson cleared his throat. "There is one final option, Your Majesty, but it would be extreme." The room fell silent. Everyone understood what he was suggesting. "Absolutely not," Prince Edward said quickly. "We're not murderers. We're not going to kill my brother to cover up killing his mother." "Then what do you suggest?" the king snapped. "The documentary will destroy everything we've built. The monarchy, our international relationships, our financial holdings. All of it will be gone." "Maybe it should be," Edward said quietly. "Maybe we deserve to lose everything after what we did to Isabella." The king stared at his heir in shock. For a moment it seemed like Prince Edward might break ranks and support his brother's documentary. But then Sir Marcus spoke up. "There is another way. We leak selected information to sympathetic journalists first. Control the narrative by telling our version of events before the documentary airs." "What version?" Edward asked skeptically. "That Princess Isabella was indeed investigating financial irregularities, but she misunderstood what she found. Frame it as a tragic case of someone jumping to wrong conclusions due to stress and isolation. Admit to minor financial mistakes while denying murder." Back at the filming location, the most important interview was about to begin. Lord Sebastian Hartwell had arrived with a briefcase full of documents that could destroy the royal family forever. Unlike the other witnesses, Hartwell showed no nervousness. He had been waiting 15 years for this moment. "I wrote Operation Nightfall myself," he said calmly as the cameras rolled. "The king ordered me to develop a plan for dealing with Princess Isabella if she couldn't be convinced to stay quiet about the Meridian Corporation scandal." Alexander felt sick. "You planned my mother's murder?" "I planned several options for discrediting her. The accident was Plan C, only to be used if psychological manipulation and media attacks failed to silence her." Hartwell opened his briefcase and pulled out a file marked "Classified, Operation Nightfall." Inside were detailed plans for staging Isabella's death, complete with contingency scenarios and cover stories. The plan required removing her regular security, creating a believable accident scenario, and ensuring no witnesses survived to contradict the official story. "We recruited a driver with gambling debts who needed money and couldn't afford to refuse our offer. Where is this driver now?" "Dead. Officially from a drug overdose 2 weeks after your mother's death. Actually from a poison that mimics heroin effects. We couldn't risk him talking." Alexander stared at the document spread across the table, his mother's death sentence, written in cold bureaucratic language by people she had trusted. "Why are you telling me this now?" he asked. Hartwell's composure cracked slightly. "Because I've spent 15 years living with what I did. Because my own daughter is now the same age your mother was when we killed her, and because I want to stop these people before they destroy anyone else." As the interview concluded, Alexander realized they now had everything needed to prove the royal family's guilt beyond any doubt. The documentary would expose not just corruption, but premeditated murder carried out by the highest levels of government. That evening, his phone rang. The caller ID showed his brother's name, Alex. Edward's voice was strained. "I need to see you. There's something I have to tell you before the documentary airs." "What is it, Edward?" "I want to confess, on camera. I want to tell the world what we did to Isabella." Alexander gripped the phone tighter. "Are you serious? I can't live with this anymore, and I won't let you face their retaliation alone. If you'll have me, I want to be interviewed for the documentary." For the first time in weeks, Alexander smiled. His brother, the future king, was ready to destroy the monarchy to honor their mother's memory. The final battle for justice was about to begin. Prince Edward arrived at the secret filming location under cover of darkness, his face hidden beneath a baseball cap and sunglasses. When he removed his disguise in the secured interview room, Alexander barely recognized his older brother. Edward looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. His eyes were hollow, his face gaunt, and his normally perfect royal composure had completely crumbled. "I never wanted any of this," Edward said before the cameras even started rolling. "I was 23 when Mother died. I believed everything Father and Grandmother told us about her being unstable, about the accident being her own fault. I didn't question it because I didn't want to believe my own family could be capable of murder." Alexander sat across from his brother, feeling a mixture of anger and pity. "When did you find out the truth?" 3 years ago. I was reviewing old financial records as part of preparing to inherit the throne. I found references to Operation Nightfall buried in archived files. When I confronted Father about it, he told me everything. The confession that followed was devastating. Edward revealed that their father hadn't acted alone. The murder had been planned and approved by a secret council of senior royals, government officials, and business leaders who had been profiting from the Meridian Corporation contracts for decades. "The corruption went beyond just our family," Edward explained. "Defense Minister Harrison, Treasury Secretary Williams, even Lord Chief Justice Pemberton, they were all part of it. Mother threatened to expose a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of government. And you've known this for 3 years?" Alexander's voice was cold with accusation. "I've been trying to find a way to make it right without destroying the country," Edward replied defensively. "Do you understand what this will do? The government will fall. Our allies will lose faith in us. The economy could collapse. So you would have let Mother's murderers live free forever to protect the status quo?" Edward's composure finally broke. Tears streamed down his face as he answered, "I don't know. I've been paralyzed by the choice between justice and stability. But when I saw you being threatened, when I realized they might hurt your children the same way they hurt Mother, I couldn't stay silent anymore." The cameras rolled for 4 hours as Edward systematically dismantled 15 years of lies. He revealed the location of hidden bank accounts, provided names of co-conspirators, and most damaging of all, played audio recordings of conversations he had secretly made with their father over the past 3 years. In one recording, King William's voice was crystal clear. "Your mother was going to destroy everything we built. She couldn't understand that sometimes individuals must be sacrificed for the greater good of the nation." "You mean for the greater good of your bank account?" Edward's voice responded on the recording. "The monarchy needs money to survive, Edward. The government contracts provided that money. Isabella was too naive to understand the realities of power, so you had her killed. We eliminated a threat to national security. That's how history will remember it." As Alexander listened to his father's casual admission of murder, he felt something die inside him. Whatever love he had once felt for the man who raised him evaporated completely. But Edward's most shocking revelation was still to come. "There's something else," he said quietly. "Mother wasn't the first person they killed to protect the conspiracy." Alexander leaned forward, dreading what he was about to hear. "Lord Ashworth, the former Treasury Secretary who first discovered the illegal contracts, he died in a sailing accident in 2018. Margaret Stevens, the journalist who was investigating the Meridian Corporation, car accident in 2019. Professor David Mills, the economics expert who was preparing a report on defense spending irregularities, heart attack in 2020. The pattern was clear. Anyone who got too close to the truth died in convenient accidents. How many people has our family murdered?" Alexander asked, his voice barely a whisper. "I stopped counting at 12, Edward replied, "and those are just the ones I know about." Meanwhile, at Valdoria Palace, chaos was erupting. Palace staff had noticed Prince Edward's absence, and security cameras had captured him leaving in an unmarked car. When King William was informed that his heir had gone missing, he immediately understood what was happening. "He's with Alexander," the king said grimly to his assembled advisors. "He's telling them everything." Sir Marcus Blackwood paced frantically around the conference room. "This is a disaster beyond anything we planned for. If Edward confesses on camera, we're finished. Can we claim he's being coerced?" suggested Dr. Victoria Marsh. "Forced to lie by his brother? No one will believe that," General Thompson replied. "Edward is the future king. No one can force him to do anything against his will. The Queen Mother, who had been silent throughout the meeting, finally spoke. Perhaps it's time we accepted that our actions have consequences. We killed Isabella to protect ourselves, and now that sin is destroying everything we tried to preserve. You're talking about surrender, the king said angrily. I'm talking about reality. The documentary will air in 1 week. Edward's confession will be broadcast around the world. The evidence is overwhelming. We cannot fight the truth anymore. But King William wasn't ready to give up. General Thompson, what military options do we have? The general looked uncomfortable. Your Majesty, you're talking about using the army against your own son and the media. That would be a coup, not damage control. Then what do you suggest? We could declare a state of emergency, claim national security is threatened by the documentary, and use emergency powers to prevent its broadcast. Sir Marcus shook his head. Stream Now is an international company. They can broadcast from anywhere in the world. We can't stop them. As the royal advisors argued about increasingly desperate options, Alexander and Edward were concluding their historic interview. For the first time in 15 years, both brothers felt like they were honoring their mother's memory, instead of betraying it. What do you think will happen to us when this airs? Edward asked quietly. We'll probably be arrested, Alexander replied. Treason, sedition, whatever charges they can invent. But at least the truth will be out there. And the monarchy will survive or fall, based on whether the people think it deserves to exist after what it's done. Edward nodded slowly. Mother would be proud of us, wouldn't she? I think she would be proud that we finally chose truth over loyalty. As the brothers embraced for the first time since their childhood, neither of them noticed the black cars surrounding the filming location. General Thompson had decided to take matters into his own hands. Armed soldiers burst through the doors just as the cameras stopped rolling. The documentary team was ordered to surrender all footage immediately. By order of His Majesty the King, the commanding officer announced, you are all under arrest for crimes against the crown. But as the soldiers moved to confiscate the recording equipment, they discovered that all the interviews had been broadcast live via encrypted satellite uplink directly to StreamNow's servers in multiple countries. The footage was already beyond their reach. Alexander smiled grimly as plastic handcuffs were placed around his wrists. You're too late. The whole world already knows what you did to our mother. Through the windows of the manor house, they could see news helicopters circling overhead. Social media was exploding with clips from Edward's confession. Protests were already beginning to form outside palace gates around the world. The truth about Princess Isabella's murder was finally free, and nothing would ever be the same again. As Alexander was led away in custody, he whispered a prayer to his mother's spirit. We kept our promise, Mother. We told the world who you really were. The final battle for justice had been won, but the war for the soul of the monarchy was just beginning. The documentary aired simultaneously in 47 countries at exactly 8 p.m. London time. Within minutes of Prince Edward's confession being broadcast, social media exploded with hashtags like Justice for Isabella and Drish royal murders. News networks around the world interrupted regular programming to report on the most shocking royal scandal in modern history. In Valdoria's capital, thousands of people gathered outside the palace gates, demanding King William's immediate abdication. Similar protests erupted in major cities across the kingdom and throughout the Commonwealth nations. Many protesters carried photographs of Princess Isabella, finally able to honor her memory without fear of royal retribution. Alexander and Edward watched the global reaction from their holding cells in a military facility outside London. Despite being under arrest, they had been allowed to monitor news coverage of the documentary's impact. Look at this, Alexander said, pointing to a live news feed on the small television. The Prime Minister of Valdoria was giving an emergency press conference, her face pale with shock. Following the revelations in tonight's documentary, the Prime Minister announced, I am calling for an immediate parliamentary investigation into the death of Princess Isabella and the alleged corruption involving the Meridian Corporation. No one, not even members of the royal family, is above the law. The political earthquake was swift and devastating. Within 6 hours of the documentary's airing, 3 cabinet ministers had resigned. The governor of the Bank of Valdoria announced his intention to step down. Most significantly, The Attorney General declared that criminal charges would be filed against all individuals implicated in the documentary. International reaction was equally dramatic. The President of the United States issued a statement calling the allegations deeply disturbing and announcing that all defense contracts with Valdoria would be reviewed. The European Union launched an emergency session to discuss sanctions. Even longtime allies began distancing themselves from King William's government. But the most powerful response came from ordinary citizens. Within 24 hours, over 2 million people had signed an online petition demanding the monarchy's abolition. Memorial services for Princess Isabella were organized in dozens of cities, with millions participating worldwide. At Valdoria Palace, King William sat alone in his private study, watching his kingdom crumble around him. The phone calls from world leaders had stopped coming. His own advisors were abandoning him one by one, desperate to save their own careers. Sir Marcus Blackwood entered the room carrying a resignation letter. "Your Majesty, I can no longer serve in good conscience. The evidence presented in the documentary is overwhelming. Princess Isabella was murdered by this government, and I was complicit in covering it up." "You're abandoning me too?" the king asked wearily. "I'm trying to save whatever shred of decency I have left. You should consider doing the same." As his legal counsel walked away, King William realized he was truly alone. Even the Queen Mother had locked herself in her private chambers, refusing to see anyone. The breaking point came when General Thompson arrived with an ultimatum from the military leadership. "Your Majesty, the armed forces can no longer support your rule. The evidence of murder and corruption has destroyed our credibility with international allies. We're facing potential court-martials for following your orders to arrest the princes." "You swore an oath to the crown," the king protested weakly. "We swore an oath to serve and protect the realm, not to enable murder and conspiracy. The crown has dishonored itself beyond redemption." That evening, a special session of Parliament was called. For the first time in 300 years, members of Parliament formally debated removing a monarch from power. The evidence from the documentary was read into the official record, making it impossible for future historians to deny what had happened. Lord Sebastian Hartwell, despite his own complicity in Isabella's murder, had been granted immunity in exchange for his cooperation with investigators. He testified before Parliament about the scope of the conspiracy and the systematic elimination of anyone who threatened to expose it. "The royal family operated like a criminal organization," Hartwell told the packed chamber. "They used their official positions to enrich themselves and murdered anyone who stood in their way. Princess Isabella died because she represented everything they feared: integrity, transparency, and genuine public service." Meanwhile, Prince Alexander received an unexpected visitor in his holding cell. Catherine had been allowed a brief visit, their first face-to-face contact since his arrest. "The children are safe," she assured him immediately. "They're with my parents in Canada, far away from all this chaos. How are they handling it?" "They're confused but proud. Our 8-year-old asked if Daddy was in jail for telling the truth. When I said yes, she said she hoped you stay brave." Alexander smiled despite his circumstances. "What about you? Any regrets about marrying into this family?" Catherine laughed bitterly. "I didn't marry into this family. I married the one man who had the courage to stand against it." She handed him a stack of letters that had been delivered to their London home. "These are from people around the world thanking you for finally telling the truth about your mother. There are thousands more." Alexander read a few of the letters, many from people who had lost loved ones to powerful conspiracies and cover-ups. His mother's story had become a symbol for everyone who had been silenced by those in power. "There's something else," Catherine said. "Stream now has announced they're producing a second documentary about other suspicious deaths connected to the royal family. They want to investigate all 12 cases Edward mentioned." The ripple effects continued expanding. In the United States, Congress launched hearings into American companies' relationships with the Meridian Corporation. Other Commonwealth nations began questioning their own financial dealings with Valdoria's royal family. International arrest warrants were issued for King William and several of his advisors. 3 days after the documentary aired, the inevitable happened. King William appeared on national television to announce his abdication, though he stopped short of admitting guilt. "Due to the current crisis facing our nation," he said in a brief, wooden statement, "I am stepping down as monarch effective immediately. The crown will pass to my son, Prince Edward." who will guide our kingdom through these difficult times. But Edward had already made his own decision. From his prison cell, he released a statement through his lawyers. I cannot and will not accept the crown while under investigation for my role in covering up my mother's murder. The monarchy must be abolished, and our nation must build a new system of government based on truth and accountability rather than hereditary privilege. The statement sent shockwaves through the remaining royal establishment. For the first time in over 1,000 years, no one was willing to claim the throne of Valdoria. Alexander watched the news coverage of his father's abdication with mixed emotions. He felt no satisfaction in seeing the man destroyed, only sadness for what their family could have been if truth had mattered more than power. A week after the documentary aired, Alexander and Edward were released on bail pending trial. The evidence against them was weak. They had committed no crimes except exposing the crimes of others. Public opinion strongly supported their freedom. As Alexander walked out of the military facility, he was greeted by thousands of supporters chanting his mother's name. For the first time since Princess Isabella's death, the truth was stronger than the conspiracy that had killed her. A reporter shouted a question. Prince Alexander, what happens to the monarchy now? Alexander paused at the microphone that had been set up outside the facility. The monarchy died the day my mother was murdered. What we're witnessing now is just the burial. He looked directly into the camera. My mother believed that power should serve people, not the other way around. She died because she threatened those who had forgotten that basic truth. If her death leads to a more just society, then perhaps something good can come from this tragedy. As Alexander reunited with Catherine and began planning their future in a world without kings and queens, he felt his mother's spirit finally at peace. The truth had set them all free. 1 year later, Alexander stood in the garden where his mother had once played with him as a child. The former Valdoria Palace had been converted into the Princess Isabella Memorial Center for Justice and Transparency, a public institution dedicated to investigating corruption and protecting whistleblowers around the world. The garden looked different now. The formal royal landscaping had been replaced with a natural memorial grove where visitors could reflect on the importance of truth over power. A simple stone bench bore an inscription from one of Isabella's speeches. Justice delayed is justice denied, but truth will always find its way to light. Alexander was no longer a prince. The monarchy had been officially abolished 6 months after the documentary aired, replaced by a democratically elected government. The former royal family's assets had been seized and converted into public institutions. Most importantly, the systematic corruption that had plagued Valdoria for decades was being methodically exposed and eliminated. King William had died in prison while awaiting trial, officially from a heart attack, but really from the shame of his exposed crimes. The Queen Mother had moved to a small cottage in the countryside, spending her final years in quiet reflection on the family's devastating fall from grace. Prince Edward, now simply Edward Windsor, had been sentenced to 5 years in prison for conspiracy and cover-up, but he was expected to be released early for his cooperation with investigators. His decision to confess had not only brought justice for Isabella, but had prevented other planned murders of journalists and activists who were getting too close to the truth. Alexander walked through the Memorial Center's main exhibition, which told the complete story of his mother's life and death. Visitors from around the world came to learn about the princess who had died fighting corruption, and many left inspired to demand transparency from their own governments. Catherine found him in the exhibition hall, studying a photograph of Isabella holding infant Alexander. The children are asking when we're going home, she said softly. Home was now a modest house in Canada, where Alexander worked as an advocate for government transparency. He had founded an international organization called the Isabella Foundation, which helped protect people who exposed corruption in powerful institutions. The foundation was funded by the proceeds from the documentary and book deals, ensuring that his mother's story continued generating resources for justice. Just a few more minutes, Alexander replied. I like to visit her when I'm here. Their children had grown up knowing the truth about their grandmother, not as the troubled woman depicted in old royal propaganda, but as a hero who died fighting for what was right. Alexander's 10-year-old son had recently written a school essay about Isabella titled, My Grandmother, the Truth Teller, which had brought tears to his teacher's eyes. As they prepared to leave, Alexander's assistant approached with urgent news. Mr. Windsor, the investigation into the Malaysian corruption scandal just broke open. The documents Princess Isabella gathered 15 years ago provided the key evidence. 3 more government officials have been arrested. Alexander smiled grimly. Even 15 years after her death, his mother was still bringing down corrupt officials around the world. The evidence she had collected before her murder had proven to be just the tip of an iceberg of international corruption involving defense contracts, money laundering, and systematic abuse of power. The Stream Now documentary had won every major journalism award and had been translated into 47 languages. More importantly, it had inspired similar investigations in dozens of other countries, leading to the exposure of comparable conspiracies involving governments, corporations, and royal families worldwide. The ripple effects never end, Catherine observed as they walked toward their car. Your mother's courage keeps inspiring others to tell their own truths. Alexander nodded. She always said that light has a way of finding the cracks in any wall of lies. She just needed someone to make the first crack wide enough for the light to get through. As their car drove through the former palace gates, Alexander's phone buzzed with a message from Lord Sebastian Hartwell, who had become an unlikely ally in the fight for transparency. Despite his role in Isabella's murder, Hartwell had spent the past year helping investigators trace every conspiracy the royal family had been involved in. The message read, "Just found another cache of documents. This time about the Australian mining scandal. Your mother was more thorough than we ever realized. She documented everything." Alexander showed the message to Catherine. She's still solving cases from beyond the grave. That evening, as they flew back to Canada, Alexander reflected on how dramatically the world had changed since that first phone call with Stream Now. The documentary had not only brought justice for his mother, but had sparked a global movement for government transparency. Dozens of countries had passed new laws protecting whistleblowers. Several corrupt regimes had fallen. Most importantly, people around the world had been reminded that those in power were not above the law. The former royal family of Valdoria was now scattered across the globe. Some, like Edward, were serving prison sentences. Others had fled to countries without extradition treaties. A few had committed suicide rather than face trial. The centuries-old institution that had seemed unshakable had crumbled in a matter of months once the truth became undeniable. Alexander's phone rang as their plane reached cruising altitude. The caller ID showed an international number. "Mr. Windsor, this is Maria Santos from the International Criminal Court. We've just received evidence about the Brazilian senator you helped expose last year. He's agreed to testify about the international network that Princess Isabella was investigating when she died. The network was larger than anyone had imagined. Isabella's death had been ordered not just by the Valdoria royal family, but by an international conspiracy involving royals, politicians, and business leaders from multiple countries." The Stream Now documentary had been the first domino to fall, triggering investigations that were still uncovering crimes 15 years later. "Your mother's work isn't finished yet," Catherine said after Alexander ended the call. "Maybe it never will be," he replied, "but every corrupt official who gets exposed, every victim who gets justice, every truth that comes to light, it's all part of her legacy." As their plane flew through the night toward home, Alexander opened his laptop and began working on his next article for the International Transparency Journal. This one would be about the connections between the Valdoria scandal and similar corruption cases in Eastern Europe. The article began, 15 years ago, my mother died because she believed that truth was more powerful than money, more important than tradition, and more valuable than life itself. The men who killed her thought they were silencing a dangerous voice. Instead, they created a movement that will outlive us all. Alexander paused in his writing to look out the airplane window at the stars. Somewhere among them, he believed, his mother's spirit was watching the world become a little more just with each exposed lie, each fallen corrupt leader, each person inspired to speak truth to power. Princess Isabella had been murdered for threatening the powerful, but her death had ultimately destroyed the very system that killed her. The truth had indeed found its way to light, and that light was now illuminating dark corners of corruption around the world. As Alexander returned to his writing, He smiled, thinking about what his mother would say if she could see how her sacrifice had changed the world. She had always told him that heroes weren't people who never fell down, but people who kept getting back up to fight for what was right. 15 years after her death, Princess Isabella was still fighting, through her son's work, through the foundation bearing her name, through the countless people inspired by her story to demand truth from their own leaders. The woman they had tried to silence forever had become the voice that would never be silenced. Alexander finished his article with the words that had become his motto, in memory of Princess Isabella, who proved that one person's courage to tell the truth can light up the whole world's darkness. The truth had set them all free, and Isabella's legacy of justice would continue burning bright for generations to come.